to show the possibilities of the website. Just for those who may not know, THEOT Project has been established around 2011. Steve, please correct me if I'm wrong. And it has been funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities. The leading force behind is Steve Delamarter, who could, within years, organize the best specialists around himself to study the textual history of the Ethiopic Old Testament. So by the time when the project came into existence, it was actually a desideratum, because around 2010 and 11 and 12, it was clearly visible that our capacities to study the textual history of some fundamental works in Ethiopic has been increased immensely. We acquired, or the scholarly community acquired, many new manuscripts, and also new technical means became available. So yes, what should I say more? This is a project who regularly reported about the progress of the work. I'm not a scholar of the biblical text criticism, but I also tried to follow what the project was doing. So I know that Steve Delamarter and his collaborator took into account nearly all Old Testament manuscripts which are available now, but they made a selection of some 40 items that have been closely studied. And today I also glad to greet in Hamburg two respondents who kindly agreed to participate: Professor Dalit Rom-Shiloni from Tel Aviv University and Professor Nesina Grütter from the Dominique Barthélemy Institute in Fribourg. So I think I have spoken enough. Please, Steve, would you like to continue and start?
Yes, thank you. It's a wonderful privilege to be here. Dr. Ralph is going to start in just a moment. We'll also add that Matthias Krahenbuhl will also be part of the presentation for among the respondents. He's a colleague with Nesina Grütter. Ralph, why don't we turn it over to you and we'll get going here.
Thank you, and thank you for the welcome, Denis. We wanted to add, we're very grateful over years. I can remember many years ago having some very extended conversations with Alessandra about the progress of the project, which we still remember and refer back to, and have helped us shape and form things in many ways. So we're very grateful for the generous outlook of the folks in Hamburg and your broad commitment to Ethiopian studies. So, dear friends, we are the members of the THEOT team. So Daniel Assefa is here, Steve Delamarter. I don't know where people are on your windows. So Garry Jost and myself, Ralph Lee. We've been working together for 13 years now. Until a year and a half ago, Curt Niccum from Abilene Christian University in Texas was also working with us. And he had to withdraw from the project for reasons of health. But lots of the way we've approached the work has been very strongly influenced by him. So here's the plan for today. We'd like to begin our presentation with an exercise that will introduce us to the central methodology of the project. We'll have a short discussion about this that we'll invite you to participate in. And then we'll move on to an introduction of the website. And then we'll hear from our respondents, from Professor Dalit Rom-Shiloni and Professors Nesina Grütter and Matthias Müller. So let's begin with an exercise on dendrograms.
Very good.
I think Steve is going to take over, and
I think we're in place and ready to go here. So one of the most important steps in our workflow is when we generate the dendrogram. As you no doubt know, a dendrogram appears to offer a dense and compact set of information about the affiliations between various copies of the same biblical book. We feel certain that the members of this community in Hamburg have learned well how to read dendrograms and analyze how they were put together. We would value your input, not so much on the dendrograms themselves, but on the assumptions behind them. So let's quickly review one of our dendrograms and given you an opportunity to give us input on crucial questions of methodology. So, as you know, we orient ourselves, when we look at a dendrogram, we orient ourselves to the horizontal and the vertical axes, right? We do a little bit of analysis of the information on the dendrogram, and then we start to figure out what it seems to be suggesting. So in this case, we see the horizontal axis, and it's an opportunity to notice a sample of 34 manuscripts that are used in this particular study on Hosea. We put this in the context of what we know from the history of scholarship about critical editions. And how many manuscripts they use. So we notice that there's quite a few involved this project, and that's maybe the first thing we notice is there are a lot of manuscripts involved. So next we would orient ourselves to the vertical axis, which describes the percent disagreement between the items on the dendrogram. And if we study it carefully, we notice, since this dendrogram scale, this disagreement scale, continues on up to 100%, that if we were to look at the full dendrogram, most of it is white, suggesting that there is no disagreement for the vast majority of the words in all the manuscripts of the tradition. So there's mainly uniformity up to 85%, and beyond that then it's where we have all of this diversity that leads to what we see on the final dendrogram. So we next would orient ourselves to the largest structures revealed by the disagreement scale. So that's all these lines and everything up here begins to show us the large structures in the textual history. And off to the left-hand side, we see this small cluster with of 2 manuscripts that is at a whopping 45% percent of difference, and we can't help but notice that's the single most outstanding feature of this dendrogram, and we just by the nature of its digital signature, we say, oh yeah, this is not just a slight difference. This is a minor variant recension of this book, or this seems to suggest that. And indeed, with a little bit more work, we discovered that these 2 manuscripts were 2 of 4 that we know exist that are manuscripts of the Ethiopian Catholic community, translated directly from the Latin Vorlage, complete with chapter summaries and versification. And so we have a real interesting view of all of them Ethiopian manuscripts, all of them in Ge'ez, but emanating from 2 different sources with 2 different Vorlagen. So then we move on. We start to look at the other structures revealed by the disagreement scale, and we see within the Ethiopian Orthodox manuscript tradition, we have these 2 large structures, one on the left side of this fork right here, and one on the right side. we would be justified in wondering, hey, it looks like the EOTC tradition seems to have two major text forms. What's going on there? So now it's about time for us to introduce the chronological information that's in the dendrogram. And we have right along in here, we see chronological information, and we start looking for patterns. And the first thing we might notice is that there is an even chronological distribution among the manuscripts, so that there's about an even number of 14th to 16th century, then 17th and 18th, and 19th and 20th. It's even chronological distribution for this study. And we study a little bit more, and we see, oh my goodness, all of the old manuscripts are concentrated right over in this area here, and the younger manuscripts spread out across from the 17th to the 20th century. And then we have the mystery of these four here, and you that know the deeper mysteries of textual criticism will recognize this little cluster as an oddity, namely a set of four manuscripts that are late copies of the earliest attested text. And so things are starting to open up to us now, and we see that this interesting correlation between text form and history. The two major text forms are chronologically determined. It's the old manuscripts that carry one text form, and the young manuscripts that carry another text form, with these four in the middle that are late copies of the earliest attested text. So the textual history is starting to unfold before us. And we've now earned the right to use the labels ETH1 and ETH2 as descriptors of the main aspects of the textual history of the Ethiopic Old Testament. We orient ourselves then even further to the smaller structures revealed by the disagreement scale. And we can name all of these clusters and arrange them, which we have done. These red ones are part of the ETH1. Everything over here is part of the ETH2. The one in blue is the modern Textus Receptus, the latest form of the Ethiopic text. And then this Lat V form. So we see that the two major text forms each have their own character, and they don't look exactly the same, which suggests that there are within ETH1 and within ETH2, there are mechanisms, engines at work, variegating, slightly differentiating subgroups from one another. And that takes months to actually sort out what's going on with each of them. But that's sort of what we do. And we then might take a final look at the legend and notice the details about what their sample is, 34 manuscripts in this case, what the sample of text was. And the sample of text in this book of Hosea was 36% of the totality of the book. And it says here that number of columns of words is 1,724, and that led to 58,616 data points for analysis. And so we might begin to wonder at that point, where did those data points come from? What was being measured? And how did the workflow go such that that we somehow generated 58,616 data points in the process of doing this work. We also notice these stars that reflect, they claim to be indicating in each cluster which manuscript is the best manuscript of that cluster to represent, the most representative manuscript of each of those clusters. And we might begin to wonder, how did we figure that out? How do we know that that's the case? So I'm assuming that if you had the time, each of you would see all of those things and begin to wonder about those individual points. But the most astute among us would ask this very crucial question. Okay, that's interesting, but does this dendrogram actually give us an accurate overview of the textual history of the Ethiopic book of Hosea. Say, well, why wouldn't it? Well, no, it actually goes the other way. Why would it? Our short answer is yes, but only if it's based on, number one, an adequate sample of the population of manuscripts. Number two, only if it's based on an adequate sample of the book, 36% in this case, and only if the data we selected from the sample is not somehow skewing or somehow misrepresenting the textual relationships between the manuscripts. So we got to ask ourselves, behind all of this dendrogram, where did this information come from, and where did the data come from? How was it generated, and how was it processed? So we'll tear back the curtain here and look a little bit at the. We want to show you what we did, and you can tell us if you think our decisions lead to data that can justify our findings about textual history. So, Garry, going to turn it over to you here to look at an example of the first product that we create for every one of our studies, and that is these aligned texts that we refer to lovingly as dots and bars files. Garry, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So first of all, a couple of comments on the dendrogram. It is not a stemma. Superficially, it has the appearance similar to a stemma, but it's showing merely how similar certain manuscripts are to other manuscripts. And I'll mention also, when we say the texts are 85% uniform, that's not uniform down to the letter, okay, in terms of what we're measuring, whether at a particular point in the text, there is a word with the same ge'ez root. And speaking of that, Steve is showing the aligned text, and in our processes, we have some manual processes and some computer processes. This currently is a manual process where in a Word doc, you line up the words of the manuscript that have the same ge'ez root. In the Word doc, tab, 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 space, space, and eventually it's all lined up. I will say we've had some discussions with Martijn Nyer regarding using artificial intelligence and machine learning to do this. And so we're hopeful we can make some progress around those lines.
It takes,
the
it might say,
for aligning the words is so that the computer knows which word in one manuscript to compare to which words in other manuscripts. And we experimented with various ways of lining them up. For instance, if you have a singular noun versus a plural noun, should that go in the same column or should it go in a different column, or various verb forms? And so there are a lot of possibilities. But for our purposes, in terms of what we want to measure, we felt that lining them up according to same ge'ez root would be the most helpful. Then from this, I mentioned we have manual and computer processes. After this manual process, then we have a computer process that is going to translate the words aligned in columns into a grid of ones and twos, okay? And so if a word is not present in a particular manuscript, in a particular column, we give it a 1. If there is a word present there, we give it a 2. Now, we reserve 0 for if you just can't know, if a page is torn away or a page is damaged, and you really don't know what the scribe originally put there, we use a 0, and then it affects the processing after that. And I'll mention so in this case, the 1s and the 2s are not the kinds of numbers that you add together to do a calculation. It's more like an arbitrary symbol of whether there's a word there or not.
So these numbers represent the presence or absence of words in a column at the end of the day. Yeah.
Yeah. And so once we have the 1s and 2s, again, a computer process, then another computer process will compare each manuscript against each other manuscript for all of those data points, okay, all the different columns of words. And that may be 1,000 or more data points, depending on the length of the text. And so you can compare two columns at each point. Do they have, if they both have a 1 or both have a 2, then they're the same. And so what you see in front of you is a grid of percentages comparing each manuscript against each other manuscript. And it can be considered a difference matrix because it's measuring the similarity or the difference. And the importance of that is that we feed those percentages in to the R statistical package. Okay, this is used in many universities for visualization of statistics. And so we programmatically give that to the R statistical package, and then it generates the dendrogram. Okay, and the dendrogram, the black lines is the original dendrogram, and as Steve explained, the colored boxes and the stars are our interpretation of that.
Thus, we can see that the dendrogram is exactly the same information as this. This is inscrutable, right? But when you visualize it in this way, you get a picture that starts to have meaning, but they are exactly the same thing. Anything else to say, Garry, before we go on?
No, I think that's good.
Okay, so I want to open this up. I'll stop sharing for a moment here and have a first brief discussion right at this point, because this represents ground zero for the project. You of all people, as a group, will have the insight to be able to see what is sacrificed by letting go of all the nuancing of a Semitic language. So all of the prefixes, suffixes, infixes, we say we're going to set those aside. We do not obliterate them. All that information is still preserved. But for the purposes of measuring similarity, we temporarily set aside that information and ignore it. And so you can see then that all of the nuancing of verbs and nouns by gender, number, and aspect, and all those things is temporarily suspended. So the measurement that's behind the dendrograms then is lacks that information, but it possesses all of the similarity having to do with shared roots. So I'm going to ask you to jump in here with us. And if there are ideas right now that at this stage of the game occur to you, that's a fatal flaw. That's going to make your dendrogram completely unreliable from this point. Or do you say, no, I see why you have to make decisions. And anyways, who's got the interest to jump in? And does the system just let people unmute themselves, or do we need to recognize raised hands? No, Henning says it doesn't. So raising of hands is Henning. Go ahead, take it.
No, okay. It's always depends on the group size, but people may simply jump in if they want to.
Yeah, maybe I might have
Denis, please.
a question. Steve, thank you very much. This looks a formidable job, which has been done with great precision. And it's like, one of my questions is, you have studied in this way how many manuscripts? Some 40, or as far as I understood, it is a selection. No?
Yes, it is not it's a representative sample, not a random sample. And it's a selection of manuscripts between the number 30 and 40. In statistics, 30 data points is sort of a magical threshold that we could get into that. But so anyway, all of our all of our studies are based on 30 to 40 manuscripts, and we've done 27 of these studies. 25 or 26 are on biblical books, and then para-biblical things beyond that.
Do you want
Jonah has 103, is it, Steve?
Yeah. So we've run different kinds of experiments in terms of the number of manuscripts. The least we've done is 27. The most we've done is 105, which is a monumental 125,000 data points just for the book of Jonah. Yeah, and if you took all those books together, we'll talk later about what that results. Dennis, anything to follow up on that?
Yeah. I have two questions actually. Do you want to continue the same work on other manuscripts, eventually on all available manuscripts of the Old Testament? There may be a limited number, not as many.
Yeah, we'll show you in just a little bit the ones that we have been working on. We consider ourselves a mapping project. And so these 25 books, we spread it across. We concentrated especially on the minor prophets. They're so inviting, as Lofgren discovered, many years ago. But we have 3 from the Orit. We have Esther and Job. We have Psalms and Psalm 151. So we tried to spread it across genres in the Ethiopic Old Testament, are the books that we've done thus far. And it will be enough for us if we create maps. First of all, if we do enough of these, we should have a pretty good idea for the totality of the tradition. If our sample of the total tradition and the various books represents these different genres, we're hoping that it gives a pretty good guide. And then the specific books that we've done can be used as a diagnostic for any new manuscript. Ralph and I have done this for the book of Deuteronomy, and there's a report on the website that shows how you can, then any new manuscript that you find, you can quickly and easily go to specific passages, see what the reading is, and after you do that a half a dozen times and it lines up with a particular cluster, then you know that it's that kind of thing. So it's maps that we've tried to create, and each of these studies, the statistical part of it represents precisely a show of hands here. How many of you are familiar with the CGMB? Is that what it is? So the coherence-based genealogical method, CBGM. Okay, yeah. Oh, not many actually. Okay, so if you are, then what these represent is nothing less than the pre-genealogical measure. Pre-genealogical measure of that method. The other question, Dennis, back to you.
Another short question would be, did you ever think of experimenting with a parallel tradition of some of the Old Testament books? Because as far as I understand, at a certain point, the circulation reduced because the Old Testament was dissected, so to say, and its parts went into other liturgical books, so that they were transmitting the Old Testament parts which are necessary, for instance, in liturgy.
Yes, so we refer that to dual or sometimes triple textual histories of a book, depending on so we've done this for 3 of the biblical canticles, studied the textual history of the canticalized form of it, as well as the so-called biblical form of it. The book of Deuteronomy has an interesting feature in chapter 32, where some of the biblical manuscripts carry the canticalized version. So there's some mixing at certain places, and they are different. The textual histories of those are different. When you are chanting a text, you can't get away with variation. Okay. So the canticalized versions are very, very stable, whereas and the entire book of Psalms, for that matter, is fully an order of magnitude more stable or more uniform, an order of magnitude 10 times more uniform than are the other books of the. So yeah, these dual textual histories and triple textual histories are the Song of Songs is the most copied version, and it's copied in Gensitz, it's copied in Gebreheimamatz, it's copied in the Canticles as well as biblical manuscripts. Any other observations about, do you see any fatal flaws in the method of measuring? Because it's fundamental to all those dendrograms and what falls from there. Garry, I see you have a comment.
Well, I was going to mention that for the smaller books, we studied the entire book, like for Obadiah or the Book of Ruth, we studied the entire book. For books like Deuteronomy, we selected passages based on some insight into where there are likely to be variants. So
14% of the book of Deuteronomy, if I remember correctly, something like that.
Good.
Henning, did I see you raising a hand?
Yes, I have a technical question concerning the dendrogram. There are several algorithms which can be used to construct a dendrogram based on the same distance matrix. So there's neighbor joining and there's all this other stuff. So I was just wondering whether you use the unpaired, weighted, or whatever, UTPMA, or which algorithm was actually used, because dendrograms may vary with regard to the algorithm used. So that's first question. And the second, what about significance and randomness? So do you have a kind of error estimate, and is this somehow recognized in the statistical analysis? Or do you simply take the numbers as they are?
So for the first question, we use the average method. So the clustering algorithm, we use the average method. We experimented some with some of the other approaches to doing that. And, we didn't do an extensive study to fully understand, but for the few experiments we did, there were not significant changes to the dendrogram. And we decided intuitively average kind of makes the most sense, but that's not necessarily justification, but based on our understanding of it.
Just for your background, in language classification and lexicostatistics, there's a lot going on in the same direction, and they experiment a lot here. And at least I think for Bantu classification, they have come up with very new, innovative language trees. Okay.
Yeah. And the error, we didn't do anything special related to that, if I understand the question.
Yeah. Vita Grazia, you next, please. Yeah, and then we'll move on from here. Go ahead.
Hello, everyone, and thanks a lot for your audit, and you are doing a wonderful work. So I have a few questions. I have a question about, you mentioned, Steve, that you are giving stars to the manuscript or the clusters most representative. What do you mean? Which are the most representative manuscript from which point of view? And also, do you mean also text form? You mentioned this, And also, I have another question.
Yeah, so these are extensions of the statistical processing, and Garry, you might have a start to this.
Yeah, so sure. So for the best representative manuscript, suppose you have 5 manuscripts in a cluster. And so for each data point, that means each word at a particular place in the manuscript, what is the most common reading of those 5 manuscripts? And then take note of that for each of those data points. Again, might be 1,000 data points. And then that's what we call the cluster profile. And then we take that cluster profile and compare it against each of the manuscripts to see which is most similar. Now, we do consider if there's lots of lacunae, then a manuscript isn't a good choice, if a lot of the text is missing. And so we take that into consideration also.
Well, let's continue with, we want to introduce you to the website, and so we'll enter into the formal part of a presentation here for a little bit, and then we'll come back, hear responses from our three guests, and then some open discussion at the end. So I'm going to share my screen once again here, and we're back into the script, guys.
Okay. So the next slide says, welcome to the THEOT Project. So we will reiterate what we're trying to do. We are a mapping project trying to answer religious and humanities questions about text and history by using digital tools and methods interpreted according to the rules of statistical and quantitative analysis. As we begin, there are three things we want you to know about THEOT. So first of all, we think that the extant biblical tradition is neglected. And when it is consulted, it is usually for some other purposes. Is consulted usually for some other purposes. It has really been studied for its own sake to tell its own story. In the last 30 years, virtually all the books of the New Testament have been published in a critical edition. But in the same time period, we have only a few works on the Old Testament. In earlier times, those who have studied the Ge'ez tradition often did not do so for the sake of the Ge'ez tradition. Through most of the 20th century, Septuagintalists used Ethiopian manuscripts to help describe the early development of the Greek tradition from 1,000 years earlier. They read the manuscripts, but they were listening for ghosts, echoes of the ancient ancestor text behind the Ge'ez text. In our day, people have begun to realize just how large that gap is between the origin of the Ge'ez tradition and the extant manuscripts that we hold and study at the moment. There are too many methodological problems to be able to use late medieval Ge'ez manuscripts from the 14th and 15th centuries to reconstruct the Greek Vorlage of the Ethiopic Bible. As a daughter of the Septuagint, the Ethiopic was never considered helpful for the textual criticism of the Hebrew Bible. So the Western world asks itself, if you can't use it to improve the text of the Greek Bible or of the Hebrew Bible, then why should a person study the Ethiopic? Manuscript traditions offer us at least two things for our consideration. We can either study the origins of the tradition, or we can study the later text forms that emerged over time. One of the most important things we have discovered is that you can't use the methods and assumptions and vocabulary of the study of origins to describe the phenomena of the emerging text. If a person only wants to know about the origins of the textual traditions, every change away from the original is a corruption. We have all heard people describe the variants in extant Ethiopic manuscripts as ongoing corruptions of the original Greek. Believe us, no Ethiopian scribe ever got up in the morning and said to his wife, "Goodbye, dear, I'm going out to corrupt the biblical text today." We have no question about the legitimacy of the study of the origins of the Ethiopic tradition. In fact, on our website, you will find nearly everything you need to construct critical editions of the earliest attainable texts of the 27 or so books we have studied. But this has not been the goal of our work. We want to understand the extant Ethiopic for the sake of the extant Ethiopic. We have tried to understand two questions, or the answers to them. What text forms existed in the extant manuscripts from the 14th to the 20th centuries, and what mechanisms were at work that made their text form remain constant and yet also evolve over the last 7 centuries.
The second thing you need to know about the THEOT project is that our work is grounded on the foundations of statistical analysis. We want to know about the textual history of the Ethiopic Old Testament. In the language of statistics, all the manuscripts that carry the Ethiopic Old Testament represent the population we want to study. But according to the logic of the statistical approach, it is not necessary to look at every manuscript to know a lot about the textual history. Instead, we prepare either random samples or representative samples. Now, random samples, strictly speaking, is impossible because it would mean gathering all the manuscripts that were ever produced and randomly select from those. So instead, we prepare a representative sample. And if the sample is large enough and indeed representative of the population, we can draw conclusions about the population. And if we do it correctly, we can be quite confident of the accuracy of our claims. We use sociological models to interpret bell-shaped curves, so we must understand the statistical logic of a bell-shaped curve and how they describe the behavior of groups of scribes in the Ethiopian book culture. The more data we have, the more clearly we can know the patterns that have been durable in the tradition over time. The THEOT Project reached a milestone this past year when we surpassed 1.5 million data points from the text in the manuscripts. It required the help of computers to generate the data, and if we are going to analyze all of these data points, it is going to require a lot of statistical analysis, data science, and data visualization, of course, all with the help of computers. We have given ourselves to each of these areas of study. There are videos on the website that introduce all these concepts and illustrate how we put them to work for us. I will also note that there are over 30 hours of videos on the website.
The third thing to know about THEOT is that all our work is open access. We have always described our work as a mapping project. Our job has been to prepare maps of this unknown territory of Old Testament textual history. We now have a lot of data about the books of the Ethiopic Old Testament. We have maps. We want you to use them. So we are making many things available on the website. Among these will be over 100 transcriptions of manuscripts. Every one of them is interesting, but you learn the most about those manuscripts when you know them in their context, when you consult the maps. When you use the dendrograms and statistical reports, they will show you where each of these manuscripts fits into the emerging Ethiopic tradition. We are providing what the coherence-based genealogical method, CBGM, calls the pre-genealogical profile. The THEOT data will provide the most extensive such reports ever generated for Ethiopian manuscripts of the Old Testament. So let's begin our tour of the website.
Okay, so the URL of the THEOT website is theotproject.com. As we guide you through the website, we will work our way across the navigation tabs at the top of the home page. And these tabs are across the top of every other page of the website. So first of all, we have the About tab. Under the About tab, you will find the usual sorts of information. The Personnel page gives a picture and description of the people who have worked on the project over the past 4 years. And that's quite extensive, and we're very grateful, particularly for the team in Addis that have worked with us. The History tab gives the roots and background of the project, describing the developments that have led to the start of the project in 2012 and how the project has unfolded since then. Finally, under the Publication tab, we have a list of the publications written by members of the team. Next, we have the tab on Reports. The Reports tab is where you find much of the data we have produced for the project. This is where you can learn about the discoveries we've made for more than 25 biblical books of the Ethiopic Old Testament. The reports divide into 2 sections, Type 1 reports and Type 2. The basic difference between the Type 1 and Type 2 reports is the depth to which we analyze the statistical and philological data we have produced in our workflows. Let's take a look at a typical Type 1 report. Each of these offers 8 key artifacts generated in our workflow, along with a video to explain each one. Because of the limits of time, we'll talk about a few of them. You will have to explore the rest for yourself. The videos should explain most questions. The first is a PDF of the aligned texts. As we've described, every word of every manuscript has its place in the sample. All the words are arranged by shared roots. When these aligned texts are converted into numbers, we can eventually produce the dendrogram, and we've already indicated the steps we go through. Every reports page has a full dendrogram. The coloured boxes and overlays represent our working hypotheses about the clusters. Each dendrogram has stars that indicate the best represented manuscript of each cluster, and a legend box with key information about the sample of data. The THEOT text viewer is the single most effective tool for the study of textual history. We will explain more about it later on in this presentation. Our most important discoveries came from the final 2 artifacts provided on the Type 1 reports. You'll want to watch the videos to see what we discovered and how we discovered it. Type 2 reports. These provide all the data necessary to achieve the goals of a Type 1 report. But the final analysis required for a Type 1 report, those last 2 spreadsheets, take a great deal of time. We had to judge that these were beyond the scope of the THEOT as a mapping project. But having completed 7 of these studies, we're convinced that they contain the primary data related to the unfolding of the textual history between the 14th and 20th centuries. We invite you to enter into the work of discovering and describing the character of these mechanisms in the other books of the Old Testament. We've provided all the data and tools necessary to do so for more than 25 Old Testament books. Be sure to take a look at the data at the bottom of all the report pages. This is where we give you details about the samples of text, manuscripts used in the study, and the discoveries we made regarding clusters, their best representative manuscripts, and about any new minority recensions that we discovered.
Next, we move on to the Tools tab. It has been as satisfying for us to develop new tools and methods as it has been to make the discoveries we have about Ethiopia's textual history. But once again, we do not have the time to explore all of these thoroughly. We will look at, first of all, the text viewer. We think that the most useful tool we have created is the THEOT text viewer. It gives us the ability to see all the phenomena of the textual tradition in a single view. Let's take a minute now to look at the text viewer. In the drop-down menu at the top, you can survey the books of the Bible for which we have completed our work. 3 of the 8 books of the Orit, Esther and Job, Psalms, Psalm 151, Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel from the prophets, and 11 of the 12 minor prophets, along with a few other works. On the front page of a book in the text viewer, we have put the text of the manuscript that is the best witness to the earliest cluster in our sample. But take note on the left, the links on the left side of the page, a link for each verse part. When you click on one of these, the text viewer will display every word of every one of the 30 to 40 manuscripts in the study. They are all aligned by columns. Even better, because we did the statistical studies and produced the dendrograms, we can arrange the manuscripts into their clusters. Now you can see all the uniformity and variation of the tradition in one view. I'll mention, please be sure to look at the data set prepared for the Book of Jonah by Jeremy Brown. There are, as we mentioned earlier, 105 manuscripts in that data set compared to the typical 30 to 40. And the data points for that set of Jonah come to 125,000.
Daniel?
Yeah. Any project in the digital humanities that creates a lot of data must commit itself to the emerging fields of data science and data visualization. On their own, 1.5 million data points we have created are incomprehensible to the human brain without various levels of statistical analysis and a knowledge of data visualization. So we have developed our project database and data visualization tools side by side. Because of the limits of time, you will have to explore the database on your own. But here is one thing you need to know about all these spreadsheets in the database. They are constructed so that you can use them immediately to make visualizations with visualization programs. We have used both Salesforce's Tableau and Microsoft Power BI visualization tools to create visualizations. If your institution has a lab for the digital humanities and has people that work with data science and visualization, you can sit down with them and have them connect to these databases within minutes. Let's show you two of the visualizations to illustrate what you can do.
Yeah, so we'll just look at two of them here. The first is an interactive control panel that was designed, built by Jared Jacobs. Suppose you want to know where the manuscripts came from that were used in our study of the book of Deuteronomy, for instance. It takes a few minutes to begin to learn how to run the controls, but very quickly you'll be able to see a map over here, and you see where because all the manuscripts are geolocated, you can see where, for our totality of our studies, right now it's looking at 95 holding institutions, 276. This is stale data. It's well over 100 holding institutions and now over 400 manuscripts. But you can begin to see this information and see how you can manipulate the chronological display of the information, focus in on a particular book, a subset of the data, and again, see all of the information about the location of the manuscripts and so on and so forth. So this is a hugely valuable, and you can the user can push and poke things and formulate research questions and follow them up from that data visualization much more easily than sitting in front of a database and trying to sort out what it means. A second example was one that I built having to do with the measuring of scribal idiosyncrasy. And if you want to know, well, I've heard that Ethiopian scribes are kind of sloppy in their work. So, is that true? Well, here is a measure of 600 manuscripts across 700 years, 22 books of the Ethiopic Old Testament, and every one of them has a box and whisker plot set. Now, if you don't know what that is, it takes a few minutes of research to figure out. It's a way of displaying information that shows the median and the quartiles of the distribution of the data. So if you know that for the book of Amos, these are all the manuscripts used in the study, and each of their measures of scribal idiosyncrasy is put here, and you look across and you see we've done that for every one of these 22 books, and that all of them, 99% plus of all the manuscripts, fit within this range of 0.2 to 2.3%. And so you would say the judgment suggested here is that there is a tremendous uniformity to the work of the scribes, and it lacks very much scribal idiosyncrasy. On back to who's got the next thing here.
On your own, you can explore the tab on the THEOT computer programs. There are many videos here and under the methods tab. These will walk you through everything and explain how they work.
So the next part of the website is found under the methods tab. The methods domain is home to half a dozen tabs. Each one will take you through another aspect of the THEOT project and explain the methods we developed to carry out our investigations. Again, we'll highlight a few just today. One tab is devoted to the THEOT workflow. Here we provide a host of brief videos that explain project assumptions and working hypotheses, as well as guided tours through just about every step of the workflow itself. Another tab will introduce you to the process by which we discover the central findings of the THEOT project about textual history. It's called the processing data with spreadsheet filters. Here you'll find 5 videos that walk through those processes step by step. If you want to really understand the central findings of the project, we recommend that you see these videos. Transcribers, which some of you will be familiar with, is an AI-based tool for automated transcription manuscripts. We use the tool extensively, and we're involved in the 2nd generation algorithm trained in transcribers for Ethiopic script. Ralph led that with a colleague, Callum Samuelson, and soon we'll provide videos that explain both how the algorithm was developed and how we forged its use in a workflow with a team of transcribers in Addis Ababa, led by Daniel Assefa.
The final tab on the homepage leads you to a list of Ethiopic manuscripts, those that carry books of the Ethiopic Old Testament. Here, we provide links to images and metadata about Ethiopic manuscripts of the Old Testament. The general list of known Ethiopic Old Testament manuscripts is the most important of these lists. The sheet currently contains over 400 known manuscripts, not counting Psalters.
I want to take a minute though and give a caveat here. This is a very preliminary spreadsheet, and you will find much of the information that needs to be finished or updated, and so there are many inaccuracies in this database. It's a good place to start. But the minute that Ted Urho publishes his website, all of us will leave this one and go to look at that, because it will be much more precise than what this is. And we sure look forward to the time when that can happen. But for right now, it's there. It's a lot of useful information, but you would want to check it all before you make big claims about things. Let me see. I'm going to remove the browser here. Then just the last few points, and we'll do open hear from our respondents.
To understand the findings of the project, it is necessary to understand the methods we have employed to discover the findings. We'll just say one or two more things about our digital methods, but the website will tell you about several others. For a project like ours, we cannot stress too much the importance of accurate transcriptions of the manuscripts in our studies. In short, we used Transcribus and employed its AI algorithms. They helped us get started, but they had to be supplemented by humans and human intelligence in order to achieve the qualitative goals of accuracy that we needed. All our transcriptions have gone through at least 3 and usually more than 8 reviews in order to make them as accurate and standardized as possible. So we have spent many hundreds of hours producing and refining transcriptions. Special mention goes to THEOT Samuel, who played a key role in the finishing part of this process. Special mentions also goes to Dominique, who has worked directly with Steve Delamarter to produce transcriptions of manuscripts bearing previously unknown minor recensions of Old Testament books. Steve?
Yes, I think at this point we're going to sort of minimize or cut out some of the information that follows. We got a late start, and we definitely want to hear from Professor Dalit and Doctors Nesina and Matthias. So we won't walk through these, except to say here, we believe that the studies and the analysis of the data provide an explanation for all of the variation that shows up in the dendrogram, the totality of it. Most of it speaks to uniformity, a little bit speaks to idiosyncrasy, but it's these final 3 categories that if you really want to understand the mechanisms at work in the emerging tradition, these are the ones: minority variance in the ETH1 period, and how they are dealt with in the ETH2 period, the deletion of a whole lot of ETH1 minority variants and the promotion of others into the main text, and new readings that were created in the 17th century. This is where the action is, and we videos and those last 2 reports on each of the reports pages is where you'll see this information. I think with that, let's step away from our script here and give opportunity for our respondents to give some words and then some open discussion. So, Professor Dalit, I believe you can unmute your window, and you might want to pin her to the display to give her her face. Thank you, Dr. Dalit.
Okay, so good afternoon in Hamburg. I was with you some 3 weeks ago, so hello again. Good afternoon in Europe and in UK, in Israel, in Ethiopia. Good evening or good morning for you in the USA. This is indeed a global meeting, and I'm grateful to the organizers for the invitation to be part of this conversation at these launching events of THEOT. If I were to list the great values of the THEOT project that we just heard about, I would obviously mention first its broad goal, that is to decode the 700 years of Ethiopic Old Testament textual history. This has always been an ambitious goal, and it seems to remain very challenging, but THEOT team, you made it. I think you proved it for us And I thus join our colleagues who praised in the earlier meetings each one of you personally and the team you've succeeded in creating among yourselves for the platform you have built to facilitate our work and that of generations of scholars ahead. So congratulations on that. From the Hebrew Bible's researchers' perspective, THEOT has shown us that there is order amid chaos, so to speak. That is, even on a large scale of at least 30 manuscripts and more per biblical book, one finds first uniformity or consistency in Ethiopic Christian Bible textual traditions that may be quantified to about 7 to 12 or 15% differences over time. Thus, second, THEOT is able to create dendrograms that show clusters of manuscript types, almost similar ones, from the earliest ETH1 and ETH2, as we looked at manuscripts through the standardized and modern Textus Receptus ones, with some 27 recommended representative manuscripts for each cluster, and still THEOT left room for 15 previously unidentified minor recensions, as you say, of which I'm curious about. And third, this textual information displayed allowed THEOT to suggest a full history of textual transformations over this long period of time. All this is well argued and proven by the statistical data, which is fully transparent through the THEOT's exemplary website. This highly sophisticated digital humanities project allows each of us, scholars and students around the world, to follow the methodology, learn and employ this basic information in various research directions, and this is a valuable service for which I'm grateful. As some of you may already know, I'm interested in Beta Israel biblical traditions. On the basis of this interest, I've developed the Orit Guardians project in the Bible department of Tel Aviv University that is aimed to study the Beta Israel biblical scriptures and the Kesot, the priests' oral translational and interpretive traditions. We approach the THEOT database with a primary question. Where do Beta Israel biblical manuscripts stand in relation to these 700 years of textual history? Phrasing this question is easy. The road to answers seems to be much more challenging. In these short comments, I would like to share with you thoughts that have come up during ongoing conversations, mainly with Professor Steve Delamarter this past year. So posing questions about Beta Israel manuscripts in relation to Christian Ethiopic Bible textual history is not self-evident, since the common knowledge among experts in the field is that there is actually no reason to even distinguish Beta Israel Bibles and other scriptures from the general textual Christian Orthodox Tewahedo tradition. The two communities share the same scriptures, so it was said throughout the 19th and 20th century, and so it has been restated since. This presumption, I should say, has also been among the guidelines of THEOT, and suffice it to mention the first subtitle on About Us in the website, and I quote, working to tell the story of the path of Christian scriptures in and through Ethiopian book culture, end of quote, completely ignoring Beta Israel. Humbly, and based only on preliminary studies, I'm allowing myself to challenge this scholarly assumption. I urge THEOT and biblical scholars generally to comprehend Beta Israel manuscripts in their own right and to query their relation to the THEOT taxonomy of Christian Orthodox scriptures. For several understandable reasons, and thus with no complaints addressed at THEOT, Beta Israel scriptures have almost completely gone under the scholarly radar. And it is good to mention here Dr. Sophia Dege-Müller works as an exception. And she's, as you all know, based in Hamburg. To mention just two major valid challenges. First, identification. What makes an Orit or any other biblical manuscript specifically a Beta Israel one? Given a long history of transmission with clear evidence of manuscripts that changed hands between Christian and Beta Israel Kesoch, this is a tough question to answer. Yet, interviews with Beta Israel Kesoch and information found in manuscripts they hold raises the need to entertain the possibility that Beta Israel Kesoch or scribes themselves produced or copied manuscripts for their communities. Second and more dramatic problem concerns accessibility. In its vast list of Ethiopic manuscripts, THEOT so far includes only very few, usually 2, identifiable Beta Israel Orits of the 18th century. This is not a surprise. Oftentimes, Beta Israel manuscripts are not held in libraries or known archives. Rather, Orit manuscripts, as well as separate codices of biblical books, are kept as living books in private holdings with Beta Israel Kesoch, now in Israel, thus practically inaccessible to us scholars. Over the past year, 2024, Professor Delamarter and myself initiated a pilot study focused on the book of Exodus, a book that has not yet been entered into the THEOT database. This cooperation builds on a new enterprise of the Orit Guardians in cooperation with the National Library of Israel and the Ethiopian Jewry Heritage Center to establish a digital archive of Beta Israel manuscripts, an archive we recently opened. During an international workshop last May at Tel Aviv University with Professor Lawrence Stuckenbrook of LMU, Dr. Sophia Dege-Müller, and Ted Erho of the Hiob Ludov Center in Hamburg, we visited several Kesoch in their prayer houses. We located 17 manuscripts. 4 were Orits, and 2 of these were 15th century copies, the earliest ever located in Beta Israel ownership. All these manuscripts were photographed for digitization and will soon be openly accessible through the digital archive on the National Library Israel website. I hope that the digital archive will continue to grow over the next few years as we will locate more and more of the manuscripts Beta Israel Kesoch in Israel brought with them from Ethiopia. For our purposes, THEOT will soon be able to include a growing number of Bible manuscripts owned by Beta Israel Kesoch and run all the statistical checks to consider where they stand in relation to the long 700 years of textual history. Our pilot project on the book of Exodus will hopefully yield some answers. As I've said to Professor Delamarter time and again, while he and THEOT are interested in the uniformity and the consistency of Ethiopic textual traditions between the different clusters, I would like to learn more about the exceptional readings and the unique versions within Beta Israel manuscripts. Thus, while we each have quite different, even opposite research goals, I believe we each feel that the investigation of Beta Israel manuscripts through the THEOT modules will be key to new findings. So thank you very much, and I look forward to our ongoing discussion.
Yeah, I'll be the first to say, Dalit, we're so grateful for the work that you're doing. And this is the most exciting development in this area that I've heard about in the 25 years I've been involved with Ethiopian studies. So thank you. Thank you. This is just going to be amazing.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think we'll move right along then to our team from Fribourg, Nesina, Grütter, and Matthias. And we'll turn it over to you to proceed with your presentation how you like.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Today, not from the Dominique Barthélemy Institute in Fribourg, but for my part from the Hiob Ludov Center in Hamburg, where I have been very warmly welcomed as a guest. Many thanks to Steve and Ralph and Daniel Assefa and Garry Jost and the whole THEOT team for letting us take part today. The Metonym project, of which Matthias and I are members, is an interdisciplinary SNSF starting ground project about the migration and transformation of biblical animal imagery, We are working on a selection of passages of the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, in translation chains from Hebrew into Greek and then further translated into Ethiopic and Syriac, as well as into various Coptic dialects. The Metonym project is designed to map a wide range of aspects related to culturally encoded animal imagery and translation, and to explore a variety of methodological approaches for researching ancient biblical textual traditions. It is therefore not surprising that Matthias and I, also on the same project, have different interests in the data from THEOT. My own areas of specializations are textual criticism of biblical texts and comparative studies in Semitic languages and the history of religions. So, in response to the presentation and the website launch of the THEOT project, I would like to touch on 3 points that make the current THEOT output unique to me: open access, presentation of data, innovative approach to digital processing. So first, the amazing amount of manuscripts transcribed and worked up in various steps is a real treasure trove when studying the history of the biblical text, respectively, the histories of the biblical texts. It is unique that you make the fruits of your labor openly accessible to all of us, and that you are also participatory curious and open to the things we might and will do with it. So thank you very much. Second, the way you present your data on your website shows that you want to be understood and want to enable everyone to understand how you collect your data and how you process it. In that, your openly accessible data provide a unique and very welcomed pool of data sets for interdisciplinary application-oriented digital humanity courses for people from religious studies, theology, Semitics, classics, and digital humanities. I'm looking forward to using the website and its data in class. The videos in particular will help students to get started. Third, you introduce an innovative approach to digital processing of biblical manuscripts. Your conversion of text into numbers is associated with the mapping of fundamental semantic differences, different word roots. This is a semantically informed proposal to represent text diversity at a first level of granulation. That is also inspiring for digitized textual criticism, and I'm eager to run some comparative studies with your methods and others, traditional and other quantifying digital ones. Since you also asked for feed forward, I would like to say here only that my third point in particular, the processing of your data for text critical and text historical studies, will most probably require some additional requirements in terms of data formats. Moreover, it would be nice to ponder with you in a quiet moment about the possibilities of versioning of your documents, so that changes and corrections made by you also in the next years could be traced semi-automatically. But these are things that I first have to think about very carefully myself, and they shall not be my last word for today. Rather, I would like to express my sincere thanks once again for sharing your work and your data with us also generously. Thank you. And I hand to Matthias.
Yeah, thank you very much. I don't want to, or I cannot add much onto the words of gratitude from Nesina. It's just an amazing project. And the major problem we have is when we dive into the material, is not to drown completely in it. But I mean, as Nesina mentioned, we all come from different backgrounds and develop different ideas about how to use it. And since my background is Coptic studies and therein major linguistics, there are two issues that I would like to see how we can discuss them. The first one is to how much more information would need to be coded, for instance, for studies of regional clustering. I mean, most of your manuscripts are now outside of the monasteries or the places of production. And in coptology, we have the same issue that the majority of stuff has ended in museums. And well, in a couple of cases, we know where they come from. Often it's less certain. And the other one, of course, as a linguist, is how could we map linguistic change? I mean, as you mentioned, you don't tag for the moment grammatical information, and the question was how much more effort it would need, for instance, to achieve research with the data for this, or I mean, whether you reckon, well, this can be more or less with the help of the parser structures supplied by the Hamburg people, done semi-automatically in this way. So instead of adding further words of gratitude, I just ask these two questions for the discussion. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Wow, this is a rich input for us, and I'll just mention one of the challenges in studying the textual history, the history of the spread of well, the origin locations of certain text forms would be a wonderful desideratum. You all will know that all Ethiopian manuscripts can be dated in one way or another, more or less accurately to within plus or minus 50 years or 100 years or somewhere like that. Geographical information, those of you that have worked geolocating the Chillicothe Selassie Church in Mekelle, for instance, is wonderfully possible with the use of Google Maps and stuff like that. But it's the methodological issues surrounding, first of all, creating a data set where your sample is informed with geographic information as well as chronological information. And this is one of the earliest challenges right now in this period of time. When we get the information up about we worked with Dr. Wendy Belcher, the PEM project, the Princeton Miracles of Mary project. We did a pilot study using 93 manuscripts on the Cannibal of Kemer story. And for that project, we only used manuscripts for which we had chronological information. We had then to develop a theory about locations in the country, centers of activity, and posited a theory, a working theory, precisely a working theory, 3 regions: the north, Tigray and Eritrea and so on, the west, Gojam, Gondar, these regions, and then the south, Shoa, and then having posited that working theory, then looked at the origins of the 4 text forms of the Cannibal of Kemer story, and were able to relate them, their places of transmission and origin of those 4 recensions. But it's just there are really substantial challenges. And Nesina and Matthias both have pointed to a number of wonderful things, how to version control and making changes that propagate throughout the system of data would be we have not had that asset, and it'd be a wonderful addition. Dr. Jost, I see you. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll jump in here and mention regarding grammatical information. So I was in Amsterdam at International Society of Biblical Literature and met with some Dutch scholars, and they, so if I can remember the names, Willem and Martijn and Yorick and Constantine, Yusuf, they have already developed I guess a parser, or identifying grammatical forms for Hebrew and Syriac, and are interested in doing it for Ge'ez. So it's kind of in the early stages, but we've had a few conversations on that, and so I'm excited about that, really hoping that can move forward.
Dr. Nesina, did you have a response? You're muted right now.
So now it's going on. Thank you. These are the people from BHSA. We are currently trying to fix something with the GitHub repository they have. And at the same time, we try a parser which is developed at Hamburg. But we at the stage we don't get it run. But we will. It would be very nice also to talk with you about that and data input and output. So we will come back to that. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
You inspire us in Fribourg, what you're doing there. Your level of methodological sophistication and digital tools and so on is more sophisticated than ours. And so we look forward to contributing to that, so you can do it. Dr. Ralph.
Yeah, just a sort of addendum to that, really, that we didn't really talk very much in the presentation about moving from the statistical analysis and so on back to the text. And that's one of the most important things to I suppose to understand in the whole process, is that in the end, the way we've used our data is as a pointer that takes us to the precise places to look to identify things. And the level of detail that you go into there is probably quite crucial, isn't it? If we had lots and lots of grammatical differentiation at this point, it would create a dendrogram so complex that we would be very difficult to read that. So for our purposes, it's worked, hasn't it? That the dendrogram and the other data has led us to the key points, and then we can write about them. But I think if you're looking for something more specific, again, you have to go down and look at that specific thing and create your own equivalent of the dots and bars file, I suppose, to pull apart the things that you're really interested in seeing.
Yeah, and Ralph is pointing to a wonderful subroutine that Dr. Jost created that gives us the capacity. Once you create this matrix of numbers and interrelationships, you're then able to query the database to say, I want to know all the places where the cluster that we named EA1, earliest attested 1 cluster, has unique readings that differentiate from others, and then run that query against the database, and you get a color-coded report that is variegated by percentage of absolute, so where all the manuscripts within EA1 have 1 reading and none of the manuscripts outside of EA1 have that reading. That's the perfect differentiator, right? 100% difference between the in-group and the out-group. That tool then is magnificent for identifying, but then you can't draw your final conclusions until you've done a thorough investigation of the philological aspect of the text. The statistical thing gets you an amazing distance down the road without ever looking at a single Ethiopic word. I mean, that's mind-blowing, a little bit humbling. Nevertheless, to finish the job, we know that you have to look at the philological data. And indeed, that's where things become really, really clear then. But to have the tools to point us right to the places, you don't have to look at everything. The computer program has it all in RAM and finds the places, directs you to them, and then you can do this further analysis. Other comments now from or questions from the group generally. Dr. Denis, perhaps you should convene this part of or moderate this part of the meeting.
Thank you, Steve. Please, anyone ask any question?
Perhaps we could ask Abba Daniel to elaborate a little more about how he has been able to develop a team of transcribers who have worked for many years now together. We've been working, and Daniel leads that team, and they're wonderful people. I've been in Addis and been able to meet them, and capable, Hewot Samuel is a marvelous gift to all of us. Daniel, would you like to make a couple comments?
Yeah, we at the beginning, the idea was to transcribe ancient texts, not only in Ge'ez, but also in Amharic. That was how we started until we joined the group of THEOT, which enabled us to learn accuracy in a better way, especially with this software, which is called Yuxta, where we THEOT was able to check how accurate the transcription of one or another person, how accurate it was, etc. So it was a wonderful experience for us through time. Some of the members left, some new came, but I think THEOT was one among the most faithful transcriber, and also the most the best in terms of understanding how things were going on manuscripts, whether there are whether we needed to make signs in a Word file, if there are erasures, corrections, lacunae, etc., etc. So it was a very enjoyable and interesting and fascinating work in this team.
By the way, you should notice then, you probably, when you begin to think digitally and how these things work, if the transcribers have, with the various sigla, parens and curly brackets and square brackets, designated different kinds of scribal intervention, that instantly creates the possibility of doing studies in scribal intervention. And our friend, from Hamburg, forgive me, did one of these studies for the Book of Judges. There will be a report on the website. Anybody help me out with the name? I apologize, but anyway, it's a Maya Priest, forgive me, is the one who worked with me to do a little pilot study in the Book of Judges, where we just are the digital fingerprint of scribal intervention then are all of these brackets of one sort and another. And they then draw your attention. You can very quickly then go through and collate lists of scribal intervention for a particular book, because it's embedded in the data and can then be identified and drawn out. And you can see which manuscripts have the most scribal intervention, and so on and so forth. There's almost endless possibilities once the data gets turned to this digital form to process it further. It takes 10 operations to prepare the data to turn into numbers, but then we have 16 operations after that filter and analyze the data and aggregate it in different kinds of ways to answer certain kinds of issues. And we've only begun to see what can be done there, and we've hardly described much of it at all. Abba Daniel.
Yes, Steve, there is, I think, a question from Nafisa here, whether there are ways of a human being to evaluate the data without using machines. I was wondering whether Yuxta could one way of checking whether a transcription is accurate or not, or is there any? I mean, we need to answer to this question, is it not?
It takes a double-blind process.
Did you see the question?
No, I didn't
see the question.
In the chat.
The chat.
No, Nafisa, could you
there we go.
repeat the question? Unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you very much. My question is whether there are ways for a human being to evaluate your data without using machines, or given the volume of your data, we just have to trust your results? Thank you very much.
Yeah, we did one exercise, or Nesina, or Nafisa. It's wonderful to see you again, or not see you, as the case. We did one competition, so to speak, between Garry. You can help me remember the details of this. The Book of Jeremiah and our friend, what's his name? Martin Heide has been working to develop a critical edition. And early on in the research there, he had been working, we just took Jeremiah chapter 2, 1 and 2, maybe it was, and he had begun to identify through traditional methods of textual criticism which were the best manuscripts to use as an electronic base text and so on. And against the work that he was doing in that sort of traditional method, Garry and I ran through the THEOT methodology and discovered exactly the same conclusions about which manuscripts. Martin with a tremendous linguistic knowledge and philological capability, and us with our machines, and we're able to come to exactly the same conclusions. And we found that as one kind of an affirmation of the accuracy of the processes. But Nafisa, this raises a really good set of questions of how we as a field are going to see, if I can say things about statistical things, and not a single one of us here is in a position probably to talk about from a rigorous approach to statistics, how many manuscripts are indeed necessary before you can arrive at a degree of certainty that is appropriate on which to make claims. And we don't know enough about the total population of Ethiopian manuscripts to begin with. Consequently, how do you know how large the sample needs to be before you can have a high degree of confidence? This is all the logic of the statistical world, but we ourselves will be the first to admit, I've been begging actually, I talked with Alessandro Bauzi about this, about Wendy Belcher about this. Somewhere there needs to be a coming together of data scientists and those of us working in digital humanities for textual history to talk through issues of statistics at a more sophisticated level than we are trained to do. This is good to be skeptical of any of the conclusions that are stated at this stage of the game until we get a deeper investigation by partners. Nafisa, did you have a comeback to say?
No, thank you very much. Just as Alessandro Bauzi taught us, evaluation and analysis of manuscripts and textual variants is much of an art. And I think to coming together for it's very difficult because human brains and machines do not work in the same pace. So, one really needs to make efforts to bring together people using different approaches. I used both, and for Gedlala Libel, I used both approaches, and I still can't say how much one influenced the other. So I tried to evaluate based on my brains and my intuition and based off what machine would tell me. And I still can't say how much in the results is part of which analysis. And it is not about being skeptical. It is just my own question.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much.
I might have a short question concerning transcribing. Do you somehow take into account corrections in the manuscripts, or how do you deal with them? Do you use them?
If I'm understanding correctly, it's what we refer to as scribal intervention, evidence of scribal intervention. Secondary hands and so on.
Which change the text.
Yes.
By whatever reason.
Yeah. So we had at the outset a list of standard practices that transcribers were to use in indicating secondary hands and the various types of evidence for change that shows up in manuscripts. And so we had an elaborate 5-6 page sort of guidelines for when to use parentheses, when to use curly brackets, when to use square brackets, all those kinds of things. And eventually
erasures is one of the things that came into play. Erasures where you can still read the text. Maybe it's marked for erasure or not actually erased or just lightly erased. And erasures where you cannot read the text. And so we had different ways of indicating those.
And there were, for every one of the transcriptions, there's been usually 8 to 10 layers of checking accuracy. Transcribus will get us these days to 96% accuracy. That final 2-3% is really difficult, and it begins with these double-blind check and using Euxter or some other tool to compare, and then going back to the manuscript, and then we hope that the transcriptions, we have kept careful version control, by the way, Nesina, about our transcriptions, so that we can be moving forward, not backward, or by proliferating. And we offer them up for people. Don't start from scratch, for heaven's sake. Use this as a base text against which then to compare. And but a good transcription, the value of a good transcription never goes away, right? All their analysis is subject to debate, but a good transcription is an enduring product of such a project. And Denis, there was a lot more to your question than I responded to, but there's lots of possibilities in this thing. We've been at this now for almost 2 hours. Just want to check in on the time and see how we're doing. But this is such a gift to us to have dialogue partners with whom we can talk about these issues. It's difficult to find people that have the knowledge to be able to do it. So this is a gift to us.
So.
Veronica 6, Dr. Veronica. Oh yeah, Veronica.
Yeah, please.
Can you unmute? Yeah, there we go.
Steve, I think she was showing the clapping hands rather than the raised hand, if I understood.
Well, Veronica, Dr. 6, if you'd like to comment, we welcome.
Hello. I just wanted to applaud. I didn't want to comment or talk. I just was listening to this event, and I wish you all the best for the future.
Thank you. It was Professor Getachew that introduced me to Dr. 6 back years ago in Norway.
It's a long time ago.
Yeah. But your work inspired us all, the cataloging work and the work with Dr. Hammerschmidt, and we're grateful to you for all of your work. Any other things to be said? Dr. Denis, I'll turn it back over to you now to however you want to take it from here.
Yes. I assume if there is no further question, the last opportunity, please raise the hand or just step in. If it is not the case, then...
Nesina, Grütter.
There's only a last question back. If the work together with the Dalit and the THEOT team, if you achieve further steps, I would be very interested to hear about it. And if you could introduce some kind of, how do you say, a list with information so you can send around a mailing list also, I would be first one to sign in. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much for the interest, Nesina. Yes. It will probably take some time. The manuscripts, the new manuscripts that are in private holding are now in the process of being digitized. And once they will be fully cataloged in the National Library, we will be able to put them into the THEOT, and this will be really, I mean, I look forward to whatever we will find there. I don't know. I'm really very curious.
Yes. Then, yeah, if there are no questions, we are going to conclude. I would like to congratulate Steve Delamarter and his team with this great achievement again. Now I am motivated enough to have a closer look at THEOT website and to dig in. And also I thank you all who are present for a wonderful discussion. It's again, as Steve said, these occasions are rare, and yeah, each of them brings something new. Steve, thank you very much. Thanks again to everyone, and see you sometime at another THEOT presentation, maybe.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Bye.
much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.
And THEOT team, you might want to debrief in the other meeting if we can do that.